From time to time, my friends, a bishop, in his role as the chief teacher within a diocese or jurisdiction, has to make a deliberate intervention into the normal Sunday cycle when his people would normally gather to practice their faith and worship and say to them, enough is enough. It's not only my right, it's also my responsibility to teach what the Church teaches. It is the responsibility of my closest collaborators as well, who represent me in their local parishes, the priests. Today throughout Queensland, the bishops and priests are seeking to teach because we feel that governments are taking us down a path of no return. Voluntary assisted dying, or VAD, is now legal in Victoria and Western Australia. In Queensland, the Law Reform Commission has been asked to draft legislation that would legalise voluntary assisted dying here in this state. Whilst the legislation has yet to come before the current Queensland Parliament, it may in the near future, whatever the outcome of the forthcoming election. The foundational promises of the Catholic Church on voluntary assisted dying or euthanasia are that all persons are of equal worth or dignity, that every person has a right to life, understood as a right not to be unjustly killed, that there is no such thing as a person who has a life not worth living, or that they would be better off dead, that there is no requirement according to medical ethics, law or Christian tradition that the maximal prolongation of life be the principal goal of all medical treatment. Prima facie, a man or woman of full age and sound understanding may in fact choose or reject medical advice and medical or surgical treatment either partially or in its entirety, even if a refusal may risk permanent injury or even lead to permanent death. That no person or section of the community ought ever be absolved from the legal responsibilities for their actions. Now, hear me clearly. Understand further what the Church teaches and why. The sanctity of life is not about doing everything possible to stay alive. This is very misunderstood out there and regrettably by a number of Catholics. So I repeat my last statement. The sanctity of life is not about doing everything possible to stay alive for as long as possible, regardless of whether there is any real benefit or regardless of how severe the burden may be for the individual, their family, or for society. Rather, the sanctity of life is about recognising that all life, all of creation, is sacred because it is the foundation, the necessary condition of all meaningful and purposeful endeavour. Societies in which life is cheap suffer from many maladies and injustices. Life is sacred from the cradle to the grave. For us, this changes everything. No society, no individual has a right to deliberately kill anyone, certainly not themselves. If society was functioning properly, the thought of killing oneself would be lessened because society would be reaching out to embrace the person who may have given up hope. Each of us need to play our part in this reaching out, to give up on no one and to accompany each other throughout life. As I have said, this is not about living forever on this earth. We are born to die, all of us. It's about providing support systems to help people die peacefully, to surround the dying person not only with love and care, but with paliative care. Palliative care is not the deliberate killing of anyone. It helps people not to end their lives, but at the end of their life, in ways that they fully recognise their autonomy and dignity. It is so sad and an indictment, in my view, on society, let alone governments, that we give up on people, or we create an environment where people are conditioned into feeling a burden. That is a sin. Pope Francis has encouraged Catholic people everywhere to resist euthanasia and to ensure that the elderly, the young, the vulnerable are not cast aside in what he has called a throwaway culture. Instead, the Pope calls us as Catholics to follow Jesus Christ by accompanying people at the end of their life with all the skill of palliative medicine and all the compassion of the human heart. It is false compassion to literally and deliberately bump people off or put them down like we put down animals. We are different to animals in this sense. We are not in the same category. We are created in God's likeness and image, and God alone has the last word in our lives. God will call us when God is ready. VAD is not palliative care and never will be. We must care first. This is the approach that the Church wishes for society. To care first means that an alternative path to that of assisted dying legislation must be supported. Suicide is a serious moral issue because when freely undertaken, suicide is contrary to the fifth commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." It is not merely contrary to love of self, but also offends love of neighbour because it unjustly breaks the ties of solidarity with family, nation and other human societies to which we continue to have obligations. It is a disgrace that governments have essentially given up on our most vulnerable in this regard. The fact that palliative care is massively underfunded makes me think that governments don't get it. They opt for the quick way out and all suffer as a consequence. Caring for people to the very end is not the quick way out. It demands something of society. It is the position the Church wants to promote today, to say that every single life is worth accompanying to the very end. As the world grapples with COVID-19 and the consequences of a virus that has killed people in every country, over 210,000 in the United States alone, which is absolutely shocking. Introducing laws like voluntary assisted dying laws, even in our own country with far less deaths, but deaths nonetheless, is terrible timing. The timing will never be right as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. My friends, I've tried to teach in my role as the bishop this morning. This is all I can do. I've no power as to how you will receive this teaching, however. This being said, we do not make decisions out of a vacuum, nor are our teachings ill-founded. If we reflect on the Scriptures today, a further indispensable part of our discernment about how we are to live our lives as believers, we'll find the challenge to raise our sights and our hearts when thinking about the future. Beyond this present life, God has planned a great future for each of us. Isaiah's prophecy of the heavenly banquet is an invitation to think of our eternal destiny. And whilst we don't expect to be literally sitting down to an eternal eating and drinking festival up there, wherever heaven might be, sometime in the future, the image of friendly conviviality, that sense of sharing a meal as brothers and sisters with one another in God's presence is appealing. And in that sense, that vision of the kingdom of God is absolutely beautiful. It's appealing because the image speaks to us, because our notion of heaven derives largely from what we regard as the most desirable in this world. The wedding banquet spoken of in the Gospel suggests that we're in this together, that everyone is welcome and we should be ready for the invitation. But why wait until we're dead to live the life that God has planned for us here on earth? The point is, as we live, each of us die, and this means we live and die together. Those at the end of their lives must never be abandoned, and we must never give up on people. We've lived our lives with others, just as we've embraced others as brothers and sisters by our care and concern so many times, a reflection of what the heavenly banquet will be like, remember, then it is beholden on each of us to live now as if we're experiencing something now of the life to come. That means we're here to care for the dying to the end. We do not help them to commit suicide or collude with a government who perhaps wishes to introduce VAD laws. Today, I, on this Dying Peacefully No Euthanasia Sunday, pray for all the dying in our community in whatever circumstances they may find themselves in. I pray in particular that they will never feel abandoned or a burden on their families and friends, that instead will feel the loving embrace and the warm whisper in their ears from the one who has shown them the way all of their earthly lives. And those words are, "Come to me, and I will give you rest."